disruptive.
Weird thing to happen.
So the Maple did this little write-up here about the Air Canada strike. They're still striking, and both sides of the aisle have not come to the table because every time that the union, Coupe, comes together with the flight attendants to actually have negotiations with Air Canada and the CEO, Air Canada, the CEO, turns a blind eye against them and asks the government to intervene. So it's become a complete stalemate, and the Air Canada workers are getting more and more frustrated. And as the Maple points out, the Air Canada flight attendants may have made labor history in this country, saying we should celebrate their courage while recognizing that the fight against unjust government interference isn't over. So this has been kind of one of the largest worker strikes that we've seen in this country. And it's still continuing on. They're still fighting the good fight. And even with government interference, even the back to work order that the ministers put together to force Air Canada back to work for free, that they wouldn't get compensation for going back to work. Air Canada and the union president ripped up that agreement and said, no, we're going to keep on striking until we get a fair deal. So the Maple put this together. It's pretty interesting. It says, this past week will be remembered as a critical moment in Canadian labor history, as more than 10,000 Air Canada flight attendants defied against an unjust back-to-work order, courageously struck and forced their employer and the federal government to stand down. After delivering an impressive strong strike mandate vote, Canada Union of Public Employees, Coupe, flight attendants at Air Canada walked off the job on August 16th. Within hours, Minister of Jobs and Family Patty Hajdu heeded the company's call for the intervention and quickly directed the Canada Industrial Relations Board to issue a back-to-work order and send the parties to arbitration. So, rather than Air Canada itself negotiating with its workers to come to an agreement, which was all this strike wanted, Air Canada CEO went behind the workers' backs right to the government, and the government demanded the workers go right back to work. Go right back to work for free. And anyone that violated the back-to-work order would face severe consequences. But luckily, the workers united together. They all defied the law. They all went against the back-to-work issue. It says Air Canada asked the government to crush underpaid flight attendants' charter rights, and Jobs Minister Patty Hajdu only waited a few hours to deliver, Coupe said in a press release following the CIRB directive. As Coupe Local 4092, Vice President Lillian Speedy told CBC from the picket line at Toronto Pearson International Airport, snowstorms have shut down Air Canada for longer than we were allowed to strike. Once again, the federal government trotted out its new favorite cudgel for smashing strikes, Section 107 of the Canada Labor Code. Until last year, even seasoned labor observers had little knowledge or paid scant attention to this obscure provision. But since the Liberals have interpreted the law's vague language around promoting industrial peace to confer the ability to intervene in any strike they find inconvenient, workers have faced an onslaught of representation. An onslaught of repression. Confident that government intervention would do the trick, Air Canada prematurely announced it would resume flights by the evening of August 17th. Coupe had other plans. Rather than comply with the government's order and challenged it in court later, as other unions are doing, Coupe instead resisted and continued its illegal strike. Standing in front of a cheering flight attendants, Coupe National President Mark Hancock definitely defiantly tore up the CIRB back to work order and told workers the strike would continue until a deal was reached. Hancock later relayed to reporters that he was willing to go to jail to secure an agreement for members. Coupe's airline component reassured striking workers that only union leadership could face punishment and that the correct course of action was to remain on strike. Highlighting the particular unfairness of the CIRB's decision, the union further pointed out that the labor board chairperson who was first issued the order was previously Air Canada's lawyer. No kidding. No kidding. I love the revolving door of politics to private companies and back and forth. Gotta love that, right? The minister just happens to be a former lawyer for Air Canada. Wow. You know, the saying goes, what goes around comes around. It's a really small world, I guess. Meanwhile, the Canadian Labour Congress convened an emergency meeting of heads of major unions across the country to coordinate financial and other support for Coupe. The militant opposition was contagious. Picket lines were, how do you say that, raucous at major airports around the country as flight attendants, members of other unions, and supporters turned out in droves. By Monday night, Air Canada was back at the bargaining table, with the parties reaching a tentative agreement in the early morning hours. The fact that we didn't back down, the government and the company got the message that we weren't going to react to their demands, their threats, legal action, jail time, whatever it was, Hancock told CBC. The Canadian labor movement owes Air Canada flight attendants an enormous debt. Facing the government down took tremendous courage. Workers across industries can look to this as an example for inspiration. That's what they fear. That's what they fear. That's why they had to keep Air Canada employees working and shut down this strike as long as possible. They had to keep this under wraps. They couldn't expose this to the rest of the world, because if people saw courageous workers fighting for their rights, it might bring more people to that concern, and they might be doing their own protests for their own industries. That's why you don't hear a lot of these worker strikes that happen more and more frequently. They want to keep you in the dark so that you don't know about this. So you don't get that bug. So you don't get courageous like the Air Canada workers. The strike has also demonstrated three important things when it comes to Section 107. First, it confirmed that the government's repeated use of back-to-work orders is coordinating collective bargaining by signaling to employers that they can depend on government interference, just as labor relations experts have been warning. The Liberals have failed to learn the lessons of the past, as Barry Eden, an associate professor of sociology at McGill University, put in the Globe and Mail. By refusing to respect free collective bargaining and the right to strike, the government provoked the very thing it tried to prevent. As Coupe itself said during the strike, contrary to the minister's remarks, this back-to-work order will not ensure labor peace at Air Canada. This will only ensure that the unresolved issues will continue to worsen by kicking them all down the road, nor will it ensure labor peace in the industry, because unpaid work is unfair practice that pervades nearly the entire airline sector and will continue to arise in negotiations between flight attendants and other carriers. So that's why they backed down the back-to-work order, because that was just the government of Canada interfering, along with Air Canada's CEO, pushing the workers back to work to avoid actually negotiating with the workers, but also to avoid media attention. Because if word got out and people understood why they were protesting and get the bug and get the urge that maybe they want to contribute, or maybe they feel underrepresented and maybe they feel like things are not working well in their industry and they want to partake in a labor movement, that's going to encourage them. And they want to stop it by enforcing the government to take action of it, which is government overreach. That's government overreach to what they did to the airline workers. And here is proof of this. This is huge. According to Cristio Alvius, says the Air Canada CEO just admitted on TV that he had no plan. He had no plan except for his secret backroom deal with Carney to bust the strike using Section 107. So the airline CEO had no intentions to negotiate. None whatsoever. The workers did. The workers demanded to come to the table and negotiate. The CEO admits on camera he has no intention to do this. He just wants the government to intervene. And thankfully, the government subsidizes Air Canada. So there's a tight partnership to that. And anytime the CEO just wants the workers to go back to work, he can call on the government to push a back to work mandate. And here is him announcing this on BNN Bloomberg, openly stating this.
As the strike happened.
But you didn't make any provisions before to ensure that passengers, or at least some of them, would get to where they're going?
Well, we thought, obviously, the Section 107 would be enforced and that they wouldn't illegally avoid the Section 107.
Right, so you made no provisions.
So he openly states there, you can't see him on camera, but he states there that, yeah, we had no intentions to negotiate. We had no intentions to do provisions or talk directly to the organizers, talk directly to the union, talk directly to the employees. We just hope that the government just steps in and stomps on it. We just hope the government put their bootstraps on and put their boots on the necks of these people. We're hoping that they mandate the airline passengers that have been screwed over by Air Canada to just go back to work for free. Go back to how things were. Don't question authority. Don't do anything. And for the love of God, don't look at this and think that maybe your industry to take benefit from this. Yeah, that's why you don't see a lot of worker protests on television. It happens a lot frequently than people realize. A lot more frequently than people realize, but they don't want to admit to it because if, God forbid, word gets out, then people will start protesting their own industries. And the next thing you know, you might have people coming together and uniting together to fight their common enemy, which is exactly what we need for this country. Exactly what we need. Imagine if we took the airline workers, the people that participate in the Freedom Convoy, the Canada Post strikers, all the people that are outraged by how this country is operating, how they are being abused and exploited through the current status of our country, and want to actually do something, want to actually resolve the tensions and crisis that afflict everybody, we can actually come together and do something about it. We can actually do something about it. It just takes guts. It takes initiative. It takes people dropping their, silly little differences and coming together on a united front. And that's what worker strikes do. It's putting the differences aside and focusing on the fact that, hey, me and my coworkers, the airline attendants, the crew work, all the people that get passengers on the planes, will come together and help make it a system that's beneficial for all of us. That we're the ones operating Air Canada. We're the ones making this a billion-dollar industry. So why are we subjugating people to worse than dirt conditions when they're the ones making Air Canada functional? Start treating people like people. That's what it really comes down to. So I asked Grok what Section 107 is. Because you've heard it numerous times. You heard in the Maple article, you just heard the CEO say it. So here's what Grok says. This is what their definition is. Section 107 of the Canadian Labor Code is a provision that grants the Minister of Labor broad authority to intervene in labor disputes to maintain or secure industrial peace. Specifically, it states, the minister, where the minister deems it expedient, may do such things as to the minister seem likely to maintain or secure industrial peace and to promote conditions favorable to the settlement of the industry disputes or differences, and to those ends, the minister may refer any question to the Canadian Industrial Relations Board or direct the board to do such things as the minister deems necessary. This allows the minister to refer disputes to the Canadian Industrial Relations Board or direct to the board to take actions such as ordering binding arbitration or ending work stoppages to resolve conflicts. The provision has been used to address strikes and lockouts in federally regulated industries such as railways, ports, and airlines. Historically, Section 107 was rarely used until 2011, when it was invoked during an Air Canada flight attendants dispute. Its use became more frequent in 2024, with the government applying it to end labor actions at railways, ports, Canada Post, and Air Canada. For example, in August 2024, Minister Stephen McKinnon used it to end the railway lockouts and strikes, and in November 2024, it was used to address a Canada Post strike. However, its application has sparked controversy, with unions arguing it undermines the constitutional right to strike and the collective bargaining. A notable case occurred in 2024 when Air Canada flight attendants defied a Section 107 order, leading to an tentative agreement after continued negotiations, highlighting the provision's perceived ineffectiveness in some instances. So this is the little gimmick that, because these industries have a connection to the federal government, that the CEOs of Air Canada or Canada Post or the railways, CN Rail, they can get away with mistreating their own employees, because if employees go on strike, they can then vouch for the Minister of Labor. They can vouch for the Canadian government to intervene and force these people back to work without coming to a negotiation. It is really eye-opening. It's really eye-opening when you look and explore why Air Canada did this, why they forced a back-to-work mandate for a strike that seems it was just a matter of days. I mean, Air Canada shut down work in longer periods when it came to snowstorms than this strike. But they want to cover up. They want to cut out any dispute because they don't want word to get out. They don't want the word to get out that, hey, Air Canada airline flight attendants are striking. They want better wages. I wonder why that is. Oh, they're being misrepresented. They're being exploited. They're used for cheap labor. Similar to my industry, similar to where I am. Maybe I should conduct a strike. Maybe I should organize. Maybe I should get other people on board. And next thing you know, you have a united workforce against a tyrannical state, which is Canada. Canada is a tyrannical state that's co-opted private companies like Air Canada and working coordinates with the government. And when you have companies coordinating with the government to enact laws and legislation against your own citizens, that is the definition of fascism. That's the definition of fascism, folks. So here, Air Canada's strike grounded passengers and stranded. The labor minister has now ordered flight attendants back to work, under arbitration. Workers' rights versus national interests. Canada's labor tensions are only beginning. So you're about to see, this is the labor minister. We've shown the video before, but I want to show it again. This is the labor minister demonizing the Air Canada workers, telling them they have to go back to work because of national interest. They like to use that term, national interest. We're building projects of national interest. But if you look at the polling, you look at what people are saying and the conversations, it's completely the opposite. They're on board with this strike. They're cheering on Air Canada workers' strike. A lot of people are cheering this on because they know that they're being screwed over. And they know that the federal government is going to make it worse by intervening in this, instead of forcing Air Canada, the CEO, to just negotiate with the workers. And here's how they did it.
It's a pleasure to be with you here today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabeg people. After 8 months of negotiations and weeks of intensive mediation, Air Canada and the Canadian Union of Public Employees flight attendants were unable to reach a tentative agreement. The government firmly believes that the best deals are reached by the parties at the bargaining table, and we will never stop believing that. It's not easy, but when
Air Canada CEO refuses to negotiate, why aren't you calling on the CEO to go back to the table? When he's refusing to talk to these people. As you're saying to the nation that, oh, well, in order to solve a labor dispute, both parties have to come to the table. Well, clearly one party wants to negotiate and the other one doesn't want to do jack squat. Because he hoped that this woman, the Minister of Jobs and Families, is just going to drop the hammer and force them back to work. He's hoping, well, Section 107 will play out and then I don't have to deal with anybody.
parties put in the hard work at the table, Canadians are better off as a result.
Winners.
In this instance, and despite resolution on a number of key items, this dispute will not be resolved quickly enough. And the impact of the work stoppage at Air Canada that began early this morning is already being felt by travelers. This is causing significant harm and has negative impacts on Canadians and the Canadian economy. It impedes the movement of passengers and critical cargo, such as pharmaceuticals, and it strands thousands of Canadians abroad, making it extremely costly and sometimes impossible to book new flights. Canadians have already...
Thank God they didn't get their bank accounts frozen. Because they said the same thing when it came to the Freedom Convoy. All these truckers that are in Ottawa protesting, it's affecting industry, it's affecting pharmaceuticals coming up to Canada. These people, now they're on the bridges. It's affecting industry, it's affecting money. That's why we got to storm in, because once it affects our pocketbooks, God forbid. Instead of actually calling to resolve this dispute and come to negotiations and realize that, hey, if these airlines are so critical and they're essential and vital to everyday services, everyday industry like pharma and other sorts out there, wouldn't you want to strengthen the workforce that's dealing with the airlines? Wouldn't it make sense that they're so vital? You want to come together and make sure that we have a promising, strong foundation of labor in the airline industry. If you're claiming it's so vital, you would think that. But these people don't see it that way. These people will demonize you. These people will demonize workers. They'll tell you you're scum. And then at the same time go on national camera and say, it's so vital. So vital to have the airline and the workers. And I just don't know why they can't just come together and work things out. So that's why I come in and just mandate them go back to work. Just tell them to shut the hell up. You won't get anything. You're not going to accomplish anything. You're worse than scum. But it's so vital. It's so vital. that we have these services. Just like how the truckers were called vital. Remember the essential workers? We're congratulating the truckers for going out during a pandemic and serving communities all across the country. And then all of a sudden the truckers said, hey, we're so essential. Why are you capping down on us with these ridiculous mandates that make no sense? They're unscientific and just make the industry worse. And then they went after them. Then the government went after the truckers that they once praised. Like here, they praise the airline workers. They praise how vital they are. But all of a sudden, they question authority. All of a sudden, they start, stepping out of line. Oh, we got to put them back to work. Because the CEO told us to. I'm negotiating directly with the people, which could have resolved all this.